The strangest part was not that my wife asked for a divorce. It was the way she did it. She sat across from me at our kitchen island in Greenwich, Connecticut, folded her hands like she was chairing a board meeting, and calmly told me she wanted the house. She wanted the house. She wanted the lake property in Vermont. She wanted full control of the investment account we had built over 12 years. And then she looked me in the eye and said she believed that was fair. I remember staring at the steam rising from my coffee and realizing I had no idea who I was speaking to anymore. Not because she was angry, not because she was emotional, because she wasn't. Because the woman asking to dismantle our life sounded as if she had rehearsed every breath. My name is Grant Whitmore. I am 42 years old. I built a commercial architecture firm in Lower Manhattan from a shared office and a second-hand drafting table. My wife, Claire Whitmore, came from the kind of family that never had to mention money to prove they had it. Her father owned 3 private equity positions before most people in town knew what private equity was. Her mother ran charity boards with the same intensity other people used to run companies. In Greenwich, people knew the Whitmores because we sponsored museum wings and school galas. They knew Claire because she could make any room feel small without ever raising her voice. When I met her, that quality impressed me. She was sharp, controlled, impossible to embarrass, the kind of woman who seemed protected from ordinary chaos. And maybe that was the first thing I got wrong. I mistook composure for honesty. I mistook confidence for emotional safety. We have been married for 12 years. No children. Not because we hated the idea, because somehow there was always a reason to delay it. A merger at her family office. A major expansion for my firm. A renovation. A trip. A difficult season. Then enough time passed that the subject became fragile. Then it became dangerous. And then it quietly disappeared from the center of the marriage while we both pretended it still lived nearby. By the time Claire asked for the divorce, we had become one of those couples other people envied from a distance and misunderstood up close. We hosted beautifully. We traveled well. We smiled in photographs. We knew exactly which details to share and which wounds to keep off camera. If you saw us at a holiday dinner, you would have called us stable. If you lived in our house, you would have noticed how little either of us laughed. That morning, she had arranged everything with clinical precision. Her attorney had already drafted terms. A property appraiser had apparently been consulted. She had a legal pad beside her with neat handwriting that broke our life into categories. Real estate, liquid assets, personal property, spousal expectations, as if 12 years together could be divided by bullet point and spacing. I asked her one question. I said, "When did you decide this?" She didn't flinch. She said, "I decided when I realized staying married to you required me to keep explaining away what this marriage has become." That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was dramatic, because it sounded older than the moment, like a conclusion built slowly over time, like she had been leaving in private long before she informed me in public. I wish I could tell you I immediately fought back. I wish I could tell you I slammed my hand on the counter and told her she was out of her mind. But shock does not make most people brave. It makes them quiet. It makes them search their own memory for the part they missed. So I sat there and asked what she meant. Claire told me our marriage had become performative. She said I had buried myself in work and expected her loyalty to survive on habit. She said I had turned our relationship into a structure I maintained rather than a life I participated in. Then, after giving me the emotional indictment, she returned to the practical one. She said the house had come partly from her family support. She said the Vermont place was used mostly by her side of the family. She said I would recover financially faster than she would because my earning capacity was more dynamic. That word nearly made me laugh. Dynamic. The woman asking for my home wanted to compliment my resilience while taking the foundation under it. Before we go further, tell me this in the comments. If someone ended a marriage with that kind of composure and already had the paperwork prepared, would you see that as maturity or calculation? I didn't sign anything that day. I told her I needed time. She said that was reasonable. Reasonable. That word too. Every damaging thing, she said, came wrapped in something respectable. I left for my office without finishing my coffee and halfway down I-95, I had the first thought that mattered. Claire was too prepared. This had not been a difficult emotional decision she had recently reached. This was a strategy, and strategies usually have a timeline. At the office, I called my attorney, Daniel Mercer. Daniel was not flashy. He was the kind of divorce attorney wealthy people hired when they wanted discretion more than theater. He had represented founders, surgeons, old money heirs, and one former senator who paid extra to make sure nothing appeared in the press. When I explained the situation, Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he asked a question I had not considered. "Grant, when did she start acting like your marriage was already over?" I told him I wasn't sure. He told me to get sure. That night, I stayed in the guest room. Not because Claire asked me to, because sleeping beside her suddenly felt humiliating. I lay awake staring at the ceiling and started replaying the last 18 months. The skipped dinners, the increase in weekend trips to see her mother, the new financial caution around topics she used to discuss openly, the subtle way she had begun separating language. Not our contractor, her contractor, not our schedule, her obligations, not our plans, her calendar. None of it had seemed explosive in isolation. That is how most collapses begin. Not with one spectacular crack, with a series of small sounds you train yourself not to hear. Over the next week, Daniel helped me do something painful but necessary. He told me to stop arguing with the emotional version of the divorce and start examining the documented one. We pulled records, property transfers, account movements, trust disbursements, email timelines. The goal was not revenge. It was clarity. If Claire wanted a clean legal narrative, Daniel wanted the full financial one. What we found first wasn't illegal. It was unsettling. About 9 months earlier, Claire had opened a separate advisory relationship through a family-connected wealth manager in Boston. Not unusual by itself, except she had moved consultation activity there without mentioning it while we were supposedly still making long-term decisions together. Then there were drafts of correspondence with a real estate consultant discussing post-divorce housing scenarios. Those drafts dated back 6 months. 6 months. She had been planning where she would live after dismantling our marriage while still attending charity dinners on my arm. I confronted her lightly at first. I asked over dinner whether she had been thinking about ending things for a while. She cut her salmon, placed the fork down, and said, "I've been thinking clearly for a while." That was all. No apology, no discomfort, just a cleaner version of the truth. But the real fracture did not come from the timeline. It came from the house. The house in Greenwich had been purchased 7 years into our marriage. Yes, Claire's parents had helped us bridge financing during a complex timing issue involving the sale of our prior place. But the mortgage, the renovations, the taxes, the upkeep, the landscaping, and the eventual value increase had all come primarily from our marital income. Our marital income, meaning hers and mine, meaning not a family gift disguised as ownership, meaning not hers by moral declaration, simply because she said it calmly enough. Daniel found something else. The initial family support Claire referenced so confidently had not actually been structured as a gift exclusively to her. It had been a short-term family loan repaid from a joint account 18 months later. There was in black and white. The myth at the center of her entitlement had paperwork against it. And for the first time since she asked for the divorce, my confusion turned into anger. Not wild anger. Not reckless anger. A colder kind. The kind that comes when someone tries to rewrite history and assumes you'll be too ashamed, too heartbroken, or too exhausted to correct it. I met Daniel in his office the next morning. He spread the documents between us and said, "The issue here is not that she wants out." He tapped the pages. "The issue is that she wants the story of the marriage to favor her before the law ever weighs in." That sentence changed something in me. Until then, I had been treating the divorce like a personal tragedy. I started seeing it as a negotiation built on narrative. Claire was not just leaving. She was positioning. She wanted to leave as the composed, injured party who had tolerated a hollow marriage and was now reclaiming what was always effectively hers. The problem was that the record was less elegant than her version. That was the midpoint. That was the exact moment the power shifted. Not because I had discovered some scandal, because I had stopped defending myself emotionally and started understanding the architecture of what she was doing. I did not become noble after that. I became careful. Daniel advised me not to accuse Claire of anything dramatic. No scenes, no threats, no dramatic emails that could later be used to paint me as unstable. He said the strongest position in a divorce like this was disciplined reality. Documents, timelines, consistency. It sounded almost boring, which was exactly why it worked. Over the next month, the marriage entered its strangest phase. We still lived in the same house. We still attended one fundraising dinner we could not easily skip. We still exchanged information about deliveries, schedules, and a broken gate sensor. But beneath those interactions was a new awareness. Claire knew I was no longer stunned. I knew she was measuring what I knew. It was like living with someone who had already packed emotionally, but was still walking through the rooms to make sure she had not left anything valuable behind. At one point, she asked whether I had hired counsel. I said yes. She nodded and said, "That's probably best." Probably best. Again, with the language of someone who wanted every cut to look medically necessary. Then one evening she made a mistake. A small one. The kind people make when they believe their self-control is complete. She said, "I'm not trying to take what you built." Then she added, "I'm trying to protect what I would have had without this marriage." Without this marriage. That phrase revealed more than she intended. It meant she no longer saw our shared life as shared. It meant she had mentally restored herself to a version of Claire untouched by compromise, sacrifice, boredom, disappointment, or partnership. A version in which the marriage had been an interruption to her trajectory rather than a life she had also shaped. I asked her, "Do you really believe you were diminished by marrying me?" For the first time, she hesitated. Then she said, "I believe I adapted around your life more than you ever noticed." That answer was painful because part of it was true. I had worked too much. I had assumed stability where I should have offered presence. I had treated reliability as a substitute for intimacy. You can be faithful and still be absent. You can provide and still leave someone alone. That was the part one had to own. And owning it made it harder, not easier, because it meant the marriage had not failed from fiction alone. It had failed from neglect, pride, silence, and two people who kept waiting for the other one to name the emptiness first. So when people ask whether Claire was the villain, I never answer quickly. Because she wasn't. Not entirely. She was a woman who had grown colder inside a marriage that had become emotionally dry. But she was also a woman trying to convert her disappointment into ownership claims that reality did not support. Those two things can exist together. Pain does not make every conclusion fair. Disillusionment does not make every demand honest. Mediation began in late autumn. There is nothing cinematic about mediation. No soaring music. No soaking confessions. Just conference rooms, polished tables, legal pads, restrained voices, and people pretending that civility makes the process less brutal. Claire arrived with her attorney, Vanessa Cole, who had the polished severity of someone who billed in 6-minute increments and never wasted a syllable. Vanessa presented Claire's position with elegant restraint. Emotional alienation, lifestyle dependence, family-supported property expectations, future security. The argument was carefully framed. Not greedy, protective, not punitive, restorative. Then Daniel responded. He walked through the joint repayment records, the shared property improvement schedule, the investment growth tied to marital deposits from both of us. He did not accuse Claire of manipulation. He simply removed the softness from her narrative and replaced it with evidence. Claire's face barely changed, but I noticed one thing. She stopped making eye contact with me and started looking only at the papers. That was when I knew she understood the version she had prepared would not carry the room the way she expected. Mediation stretched across 3 sessions. In between, the social consequences began. That part surprised me more than the legal one. In communities like ours, news does not arrive loudly. It leaks. A canceled dinner, a changed RSVP, a friend who suddenly asks if you are doing all right with too much delicacy. No one said anything openly cruel, but there was a shift. People who had admired us now watched from the edges. Some aligned quietly with Claire, some with me, most with whoever seemed less likely to make them uncomfortable at future events. And this is where divorce becomes about more than two people. It becomes a test of how many versions of your life were social theater. People do not just choose sides. They choose the story that protects their own idea of how marriages fail. At the second mediation session, Claire asked for private discussion without the attorneys for 10 minutes. Daniel advised against it. I asked for 5 instead. We sat in a smaller room with glass walls and untouched water glasses between us. She looked tired for the first time. Not polished, not composed, tired. She said, "I didn't want this to become ugly." I said, "Then you shouldn't have tried to rewrite the numbers." She closed her eyes for a second. Then she said something I still think about. She said, "I needed to feel that leaving meant something." I asked what that meant. She said, "If I walked away with half of everything in a condo, it would feel like I blew up my life for a technical settlement." She wanted more because ordinary fairness felt emotionally insufficient. She wanted the terms to validate the pain. She wanted the outcome to prove that her unhappiness had been severe enough to justify the destruction. And that is a dangerous thing people do. They ask the material result to carry the emotional meaning. Think about that for a second and tell me honestly, have you ever seen someone demand more than fairness because fairness did not feel emotionally satisfying? I told Claire the truth. I said I was willing to own my failures. I was willing to divide what was ours. I was not willing to donate my silence, so she could leave feeling historically vindicated. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just looked at me as if I had finally become inconvenient. The final settlement came 3 weeks later. We sold the Greenwich house, not because either of us wanted to, because neither side could justify exclusive retention without offsetting consequences the other would never accept. The Vermont property was transferred into a split arrangement, then sold the following spring by mutual agreement when neither of us wanted to keep visiting a place so attached to the marriage. The investment account was divided according to traceable marital contribution and applicable law. No one got everything. No one walked away destroyed, which, in real life, often feels unsatisfying to everyone involved. There was no dramatic courtroom moment, no public exposure, no spectacular event, just signatures, wire transfers, revised addresses, awkward conversations with accountants, and a legal ending of a life that had once looked stable from the driveway. The emotional consequences came later. They always do. Claire moved into a rental in Darien first, then later into a smaller restored property closer to the water. I heard through mutual friends that she stepped back from several board commitments for a while. Not because of scandal, because she did not want to answer the same questions over lunch. I don't know whether she regretted the divorce. I think regret is often too simple a word. I think she regretted that clarity did not feel cleaner. I think she expected relief to arrive dressed as certainty. Instead, it probably arrived looking like paperwork in quiet rooms. As for me, I rented an apartment in Tribeca and spent the first 6 months learning how loud silence can be when it no longer belongs to two people. I worked too much at first because work still obeyed effort, but eventually even that stopped numbing anything. So I did the less glamorous thing. I started therapy, not the performative kind people mention at dinner to sound evolved. The uncomfortable kind. The kind where you realize your version of being a good man may have mostly involved being useful, steady, and emotionally unavailable. The kind where you have to admit that neglect is not always loud. Sometimes it wears a suit, pays the bills, and assumes loyalty will survive on structural integrity alone. A year after the divorce, Claire and I met for coffee to finalize one lingering document tied to the Vermont sale. She seemed softer, not warmer, just less armored. We spoke politely. At one point, she said, "I know you think I try to punish you." I said, "I think you try to make the outcome feel proportionate to your pain." She looked down and said, "Maybe." That was the closest we ever came to an honest summary. I don't hate her. That surprises some people. But hatred is exhausting, and it also flatters the story by pretending one person carried all the damage. The truth is harder. Claire wanted out a marriage that had become emotionally barren. She was right about that. But she also wanted the settlement to tell a story grand enough to justify her leaving. She was wrong about that. And I wanted to believe that working hard, staying faithful, and avoiding overt cruelty made me a good husband. I was wrong about that too. People think divorces are usually about one betrayal. An affair, a lie, a major exposure. Sometimes they are. But sometimes they are about two competent adults slowly turning a marriage into a polished shell and then fighting over who gets to define what was inside it. So when I think back to that morning in the kitchen, I no longer remember the list first. I remember the calm. I remember how shocking it felt. And I understand now that calm is not always wisdom. Sometimes it is just distance that has had enough time to organize itself.